Hello, welcome to another episode of Rustacean Station. I'm your host, Alan Wyma. Today we're back with Zishan, my co-host.
Hello.
And we have a very special guest, Rainer Stropek. I think I said that somewhat correct. And do you mind telling the audience how you say it in German? Because I thought that was very interesting.
It's difficult for people from the UK and US to pronounce it correctly. It's Rainer Stropek. That is difficult to say, but Rainer is perfectly fine. Thank you, Ellen and Sishan, for having me. I'm very glad to be on your show.
I feel like you turn the German accent off and on very easily. It's really, because you're obviously German, right?
I'm Austrian.
No.
That's
Austrian. Oh, okay, sorry.
Alan, you made a very bad mistake.
Yeah, I heard there's some animosity between the two, but...
No, it's really not. It's kind of, you see, we are all friends, but still, it is important whether you are German or Austrian.
Yeah.
It's not really serious.
I should have known that you were too happy to be German. You know, most Germans are not very happy. Most of the words I've learned in German from a German guy are like very sad words. What was it? Like, you put me on the spot. I don't remember the word now, but it was like very sad words he's taught me. But I heard that in general, that the southern part of Germany, not many people really enjoy them. Or was it the northern part? It's like Germans and Austrians both bond over one of the sides that they don't really enjoy that side too much. I forgot what it was I heard from somebody else. But maybe I shouldn't be hating on anybody. Anyways, I just think it's interesting. Yeah, so we're here to talk about Rust Linz, right?
You told me that you're interested in about Rust Linz and how we started it, how it goes, what we do, and things like that. And I'm more than happy to talk about that because that topic is very near to my heart.
Now, the first question is Rust Linz. Now, Linz is the name of the town, right? In Austria.
That is correct. Yes. Linz is my hometown. Well, it's not my hometown, but it's the town where I have been living for the past, 40 years or something like this. It's a beautiful town, mid-sized town in Austria. It's right in the middle between Vienna and Salzburg on the beautiful Danube River. And we called it Rust Linz because it is part of a series of community events that we do here locally to engage with the local community here, particularly in Linz. But as Rust Linz is a virtual format, at least mostly, we had two in-person meetups so far. Mostly it's virtual. Because it's a virtual meetup, we have guests from around the globe, and we also have viewers and visitors from around the globe. Yeah.
That's interesting. So that must be why you're using StreamYard, right? Is it from Rust Linz or this is something else?
Yeah, in fact, Rust Linz is one meetup of the Coding Club Linz. We are a community of coding, of people who are passionate about coding. And I have the honor to be chairman of the Coding Club Linz. And Rust Linz is one of the meetups that we do. We have multiple meetups for kids, meetups for professionals. And as we do quite a few of virtual events all around the year, we have a bunch of StreamYard licenses to use for streaming and things like that. And this is what we are currently using here, yes.
I was curious about work with the kids. That was my most interesting bit for this session. I wanted to ask a few questions about that. So firstly, I'm really curious, how did you get into teaching coding for kids? Where did you get this idea? If there is a story behind it or...
Yeah, there is in fact a story behind it. You see, I have to tell you a secret. Ever since I have left computer science school, I visited a vocational college here in Austria for computer science. I thought one day I'm going to go back to this school because I loved it so much and I'm going to be a teacher where I have been a student for many years. And that was a dream for me for decades. Ever since I left school, I was thinking about one time I will enter this school being a teacher and teaching kids how to code. And I think 8 or 9 years ago, I visited an IT conference in Belgium together with my wife. She's a programmer too, the Techorama conference. And we heard about a movement going on, which is called CoderDojos. CoderDojos are volunteer-driven computer clubs for kids. They are free, and everybody who would like to learn about coding, starting with, I think, 7 years or something like this, can visit CoderDojos. And we were fascinated from this idea. I wasn't a teacher at that time at my former school, but still I had this passion in me of working with kids. And so when we drove back with the train from Belgium, we talked to each other and said, hey, it would be nice to join such a CoderDojo. And we looked around in Austria where there are such CoderDojos. And it turned out that Austria was a pretty blank spot in terms of CoderDojos. There wasn't much going on in terms of kids who would like to learn how to code. There were some, but only a few times a year, but no regular coding club. And we really didn't understand it. And so, to make a long story short, we decided if there is no club that we can join, let's found one. And that is exactly what we did. We simply started one. We asked some friends and their kids whether they would be interested in visiting a coding club, and they said yes, and we started, and that's the story of the CoderDojo Linz. We just started, and we have been doing that for over 8 years now. Yeah, over 8 years. And over time, it became bigger. We started additional movements. We started with meetups. We started to support various community activities. And out of that came the Coding Club Linz, where the CoderDojo is currently just one of the things that we do, and Rust Linz is another thing that we do. I can tell you about some recent activities that we have started in the last few weeks and months. If you're interested, maybe later in this podcast.
Of course. It's interesting. Actually, if you remember, I sent my son to attend some of the sessions. And each time I had to basically force him because he's a teenager. He needs pushing to do anything. But after attend, he would say it was really good, great, and it was good that you pushed me there. So you're doing a pretty good job. Just want
Thank you very much.
Do a shout out for that.
Yeah, I think all our mentors are very excited about coding. I mean, that's my passion. I don't know about you, but for me, the extreme luck that I made my biggest hobby my job. I'm considering myself super, super lucky because if I wouldn't be a professional coder, I would code in my spare time every single hour. And with that, I can do what I love. I have a lot of fun with it. And it's the job with which I earn my money. So, hey, that's a very beautiful life. And exactly that kind of life is what we would like to open perspectives to kids. So they should see that this is definitely something where you can have a lot of fun. It's a fulfilling job. And that's the vision of CoderDojo, opening perspectives for young people to learn code, maybe Rust, maybe another language, whatever they enjoy.
Yeah, that actually interesting that you said that, because that brings me to the next question I was interested in asking. Do you think Rust could be a language that we can teach kids? If not, why? And if yes, then how?
Oh, I would love to. I personally think that you can teach kids every language. I mean, I have to be more specific. If we are talking about kids who have not learned to read yet, obviously a language based on text is not an option. So we need some graphical block-based programming languages for that. Even if the kids have just learned how to read, maybe with 6 or 7 or 8 years, a textual language like Rust is a little bit overwhelming. Something like Scratch and an hour of code and things like that is much easier to handle. So if we are talking about kids younger than 10, I think it is hard to start with textual-based programming. But when we talk about kids or young adults starting with 10 years and up, every language is suitable for teaching how to code, because let's make it very clear, the first exercises that you do are primarily typing exercises. It doesn't matter which programming language you do, you are looking for the greater sign and the lower sign and the curly brace and the different kind of braces. And it's really a very basic typing exercise and a kind of mental exercise talking about coordinate systems when you want to draw something, or learning the basics about variables and loops and things like that. And that can be taught and can be learned with any language that is out there. However, there are languages which are easier to approach because they allow you, with only a few lines of code, to create funny games, to create exciting results, for instance. That is, for instance, the reason why I typically use TypeScript and web development when I work with kids who just started to code. Why? With HTML, CSS, TypeScript, and StackBlitz, for instance, I can create a creative coding exercise or a game within minutes. And kids immediately understand what we are doing. If you create a for loop, for instance, in TypeScript, and the result is a bunch of lines, and you see the pattern emerge on the screen, you get an implicit understanding of what this loop is all about and what the variable is going to do. And if you compare that with Rust, it's quite a bit harder. I need to install a lot of prerequisites. I need to install a compiler. I need to install a development environment. If you install the development environment, you need to install some plugins. You need to handle files. You need to know where to store them. Kids will forget where they stored their files, of course. They will struggle with GitHub and so on. So all of that is way too complicated. And a fully browser-based development environment that allows you to create visual results, not just text output, is key, if you ask me, for motivation. And this is the primary thing that we need in order to get people and get kids fascinated for coding. We need funny, exciting, creative results. And that's the reason why we are in the Coding Club Linz hesitating in teaching Rust to young kids, young coders who are just starting to code. So if we would have a Rust playground that could immediately render some graphical output where we don't have to install any additional tools, then I would not hesitate and immediately take Rust into my tool belt of languages and platforms that I teach for beginners.
Cool. Makes a lot of sense, actually. My answer is my question is very well answered now. But do you think that with talking of kids, is it possible, like, some advantages of being a kid, like when you come to learn something, you don't have any preconceptions at all, and maybe that helps them a lot as well, right? Like in some ways, maybe it's easier to teach kids. Do you think there's any truth to that?
That's a very difficult one. And I have this discussion with teachers pretty frequently, also with mentors. Is it easier to learn something as a kid? I think that kids approach certain problems very differently from most adults. I would not say all adults, but most adults. Most adults try to learn things from bottom up. For instance, last week, I was teaching other teachers. I now teach at the University for Education here in Upper Austria, and I regularly do coding lessons for teachers who then do coding lessons in schools. And I showed them the foundations, the principles of TypeScript. And immediately, one of the adult teachers asked me, hey, I have a fundamental question. I need to understand it. If this is a programming language, with which programming language was TypeScript programmed? And with which programming language was the program language coded? With which TypeScript was coded? I mean, you know where I'm heading to. So immediately this structured approach, trying to learn the basics, having some kind of fear that you don't understand, that you don't have the full picture and things like that. Kids don't work and learn like that, at least if we let them choose the kind of learning themselves. They approach the problem in a very different way. The first and foremost important thing is they want to have fun. They simply want to have fun. They want to try things. You can show them things, and they don't ask, how does that work and what is the theory behind it when they think about coding. And that is the thing that, if you ask me, is the important thing. And that is also the difference between many adults and kids. I think we as professional coders can learn a lot from kids there. I try to approach new technologies in the same way. Sometimes it's hard. I'm pretty sure you know that. You take a look at a new language and you immediately get frustrated because it's simply hard. You cannot get done what you want to have done. And I personally always remember, or try to remember, the kids. I sit down and say, I don't have a goal. I don't have a goal. I just take this tool, this programming language, and try to have fun with it. And if I do that, yeah, it's way more fulfilling. Does that make sense, what I tell you? Do you have similar experience?
Yeah. Actually, that is a difficult question, and then you answered very well. So it's very impressive.
I was just say, sorry, let me ask you a question now. I've taught some kids, I've been around kids, I have younger siblings, etc., right? So there is times when they do ask the question, how did this programming language come about? And because I always thought as a kid, like, how did the first tool come about? Because I know we use tools to make tools. They do ask sometimes some fundamental questions.
They do.
And you do see a lot, like in jokes, it's like, you know, why? And you start asking yourself, actually, I have no idea why. And you do get these kind of fundamental questions. And I don't know, I feel like sometimes, you know, how do you handle these kinds of questions? You just approach them the same?
We show them.
You show them.
We do exactly that, but again, we make it in a playful way. Let me tell you a story. A few years ago, I had such kids. I had a group of kids and they were asking me again and again, how does a computer really work? And what does a hacker do? And how does the CPU work and whatever? And so I told them, okay, you know what? In the next few weeks, we are going to do a deep dive. And I created a bunch of exercises where we really sat down with a bunch of 12-year-olds and wrote assembler code. But I made some challenges out of it. I told them something about hacking, and I showed them how we can crash a computer program just because it's fun to write something which immediately crashes. And then we try to apply this knowledge to a higher programming language and again make it crash, so that we see that a null reference exception is really something that we can not just see in assembler and see. And also I try to make it again a kind of game, a funny game, but this time we are going to take things apart. I didn't try to approach the topic and telling them about, I don't know, logic theory and things like that. Again, I try to make it a game. I try to make it a fun experience. But believe me, those kids, once we wrote a few lines of assembler, they never asked me again about it. We went back to some simple gaming engines and had fun, I don't know, creating a simple version of, I don't know, Donkey Kong or something like that.
Yeah, because that was actually my follow-up question was, so many people, they want to get to know coding, I taught coding, very simple stuff. And, they ask me, how do you do like 3D games? Because that's what I want to do. And I'm like, you need to understand, that's like beyond running. That's like flying. If you talk about baby steps, it's way out there. You need to take some time. And once you start teaching them and even talking about, okay, you got to learn this and that and that. And they're like, okay, forget it. I'll just stick with the baby steps right now because this is too much. They didn't know how complicated these things were.
Mm. And I think personally that this is one of the most important takeaways for kids who are not going to be professional coders. Because a lot of kids come, for instance, to us, to the CoderDojo, and they learn some fundamental principles of, let's say, Scratch, and then maybe a little bit of HTML and CSS and TypeScript and so on. And to be honest, a lot of them, from that point on, they lose interest and they move on to something else that is more fun for them. And that's perfectly fine. But the minimum, what they get out of their, let's say, tiny, teeny little experience in coding is an understanding how huge this universe is and what is a complicated requirement and what is a simple requirement. And that is a super interesting learning, I think, that they can take away with them, even if they are not going to be professional programmers. That's perfectly fine. They have some basic understanding and they at least speak a little bit of the language and they have some mental picture about what's coding, or what's all about with coding and what a 3D game really means. I mean, I don't know about you, but currently it's kind of changing a little bit with all this artificial intelligence things going on and with GitHub Copilot and with GPT, learning them, tutoring them of doing pretty complicated things. A lot is going on currently in this area, but we have to find out what that means for future generations of coders. I don't have a clear picture about that.
Now, what do you feel about if somebody says, I'm going to kind of go back to more what the beginning of what you were saying, where not everybody wants to continue on the path. Now, you've obviously coded before, but because sometimes you really need to sit down and think and really focus and do lots of research and try all kinds of things. And not everybody has that. I don't even know if you can even call it an ability. I think it's almost like an ability, right? Because especially with kids, as we're talking about, you have to make it fun. Programming is not fun all the time. In general, I think it's fun, but sometimes it's really painful, right? Do you think that every kid could be a coder? Or is it really that some people have that knack or that ability or that type of personality that they can and others cannot?
Well, in that regards, I like to compare coding with playing a musical instrument. Everybody can play the piano. Yeah, of course. You can sit down and play the piano. You can learn how to play the piano. If you have an electronic piano at home, you can play piano immediately because there is a button which says demo mode and you only have to press it and something beautiful comes out of this digital piano. That's like everybody can code by asking ChatGPT to create a to-do app. Yeah, everybody can do that, but that's the piano demo mode, if you ask me. Now, can really everybody learn how to play the piano? Well, yes, it depends on how good you want to become. And there, of course, there are differences. Some kids, they develop a kind of passion about this world of coding, about solving things with their mind by thinking about it, solving logical puzzles and applying a programming language on it. It's just like kids who try the piano and immediately get hooked on it, and they simply want to play music and become very good with it. And that's all I think we can do as adults, as professional coders. We can try to show them that there is a world that is fascinating, that might be beautiful to them. Not all are going to be passionate about it, and not everybody is going to be passionate about playing the piano, for instance. But in theory, everybody could be a coder if they decide to. That is something that they want to learn and they want to especially practice in the future. So when working with kids, for me, it's always opening up perspectives. I said it before. Many kids have no idea what coding means and how fulfilling coding can be. And that is exactly what we try to do here in the Coding Club Linz. We try to open perspective. If the kids then decide to not follow this path, that's perfectly fine. That's absolutely fine. And we consider that a success for our club. If a kid found out that coding is not the right career or educational choice for them, that's perfectly fine. But in theory, they could. And that's our job, to make sure that everybody who wants has the possibility to try it and to discover this passion.
Now, another kind of follow-up question about this topic. I like the way you say it. You're starting to change my mind a little bit because, again, I already said before, I think there's people who can, I think there are people who can't. But I think what you're saying makes a lot more sense. So I'm going to start to think differently from now on because of you. I'm thinking another thing. Have you ever had a student who just picked up programming so well, but they really did not want to pursue it? Right? Because to me, there's people who do have this kind of like natural ability, but sometimes I just don't find it fulfilling. And if you do ever find this, like, how did you react, or how would you react? Would you try to find something in that field for them? Or would you just say, okay, sorry, this individual doesn't like it, just let them be? Or that's kind of a couple different questions in there.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So far, I cannot think of a kid who has a huge potential and also maybe wants or has, let's say, a talent for coding, but from his or her own motivation wants to stop or do something else. In many cases, especially in the age that we work with kids, parents have a huge influence. And very unfortunately, I had this experience that you are describing pretty frequently with girls. I cannot tell you how often we have parents visiting us with a small boy and a small girl, and they immediately ask the boy whether he wants to join us. And when we approach them and ask the girl too, hey, do you want to join us too? We hear things like, oh, that's nothing for her, but he might be interested. He is into technical stuff. And personally, I really dislike this attitude. I don't like that. And I see that pretty frequently. So yes, I have seen particularly girls whom I would consider being talented for coding, but they stopped doing it because they didn't have a role model. Even more, some of them were discouraged from doing that because, well, technology and girls doesn't really come together or go together. And I absolutely don't agree with that. So yes, I've seen that. And all we can do is giving possibilities, giving opportunities, ask again, trying to be motivational. And also, especially when it comes to different children, particularly girls, try to be as exclusive as possible when choosing certain themes and topics about what we do in coding. In CoderDojo, there is an unwritten rule which says it shouldn't have wheels and it shouldn't fly in space if you want to be inclusive. Because studies have shown that certain kinds of exercises attract certain personalities. And there are, and that's a fact, there are studies from CoderDojo, there are certain topics which attract more boys, talking about in general, talking about percentages. Of course, there are exceptions, I'm perfectly aware of that. But in general, there are topics with which you attract more boys, and there are topics with which you attract more girls. And we try to create and design all our classes, our approaches outside, our exercises in a way that is open for everybody and kind of neutral, or at least if we offer something with this, which is traditionally, speaking of percentages, boy-oriented, again, offer another topic, maybe at the same time or in parallel or next week, that is traditionally more girl-oriented, because it's a fact. And if you just do one thing, then of course there are exceptions, but in general you attract more, in the case of coding, boys, and that's a problem. So yes, Alan, I have recognized that, and it really hurts, and it particularly is a problem with engaging with girls.
Talking of parents' involvement, like you talk about having a role model. In my house, I could be the role model. I'm putting quotes for my son, but it's not working as I would have imagined. But I think it's mainly because he thinks too highly of me, and then he thinks I can never be on that stage or that good in programming. So I feel that. But there's also the fact that I've never been really a teacher. Like I've done, presentations and stuff, but to adults, I've never been teaching to kids. So I don't know how the mentality works, and that's why you were more successful with my son than I was, because I was expecting him to understand things like abstractions, right? Like I was telling him, oh, you wrote this code, it works, but maybe you should put it in different functions, and create functions and split it and all that stuff that we programmers love to do, right? And he just didn't understand, and why would he need to do that? Like, what's the need for that? And to me, that was very hard, because I was trying really hard to make him understand what is abstraction, why is it needed and stuff. But I felt quite miserably in that. But I think the way you teach, you succeed quite well, because you're not going into those topics.
Yeah, but Zishan, you shouldn't worry about that, because we see that very, very frequently. I've talked to other teachers, for instance, soccer teachers, football, I think you say in the US, who told me similar problems when they want to teach their own kids. Sometimes you simply shouldn't work with your own kids, because there is always a certain level of relationship. And if you want to try something and so on, the personal relationship interferes in the learning and things like that. So sometimes for some kids and some adults, it is much better to have a different group. Again, exceptions always exist, but in many cases, if you would come to a real life CoderDojo, maybe you can work with some other kid, and your kid can work with some other parent, and it might work out pretty well. So yeah, for some combinations of kids and parents, it's easier to mix.
You may find a better kid. I don't know. Be careful. Sorry for that joke. No, yeah, but I'm also thinking, I was doing some coaching, like, for this hackathon, and something I noticed a long time after the hackathon finished, I kept giving tips, oh, you're writing Python, you should do it like this. And the responses I got back from the kids were kind of looks of horror, like, well, who are you and why are you bothering me? I think that when they're kids and when they're young and they're first starting off for the first couple of years, or I don't know how long it should be, maybe it's kind of a feeling thing, let them code, let it work, and try your best not to be picky and try to make it better and easier to work with. That's something you do probably later on, when they start getting into it.
I'll let the kids make their own mistake.
Yeah.
Don't try to tell them why there is a rule which says don't repeat yourself. Just give them some exercises, and at one point they will be tired of repeating and repeating and repeating themselves, and then they will ask, what can I do about it? And then they will be receptive for what you tell them. But we need to let them make their own mistakes. They will not understand why they use classes in an object-oriented language. Why do we need encapsulation? I currently have a first class in our vocational college, and for instance, it's really hard for them to understand why there are methods. I mean, they are building rather simple things, programs that only do one certain task, and they never have seen a larger application. It's really hard for them. In that case, it's a structured approach of education inside of the school. So they have to trust me because I'm a teacher, and I can tell them to create a method because I'm the teacher. That's it. In a programming club, I couldn't do that. I would let them solve the problem however they want. And I hope that at one stage, they are going to tell me that something is really difficult and it bothers them and they don't like working that way. And then I have a smile from one ear to the other, and I will tell them about certain ways of structuring code and things like that. I think it was Elon Musk who at one point said, it doesn't pay off to describe a screwdriver to a kid because they will not listen to you. But give them a motor and they want to take it apart. And then they find a screw and they are asking you, how can I open the screw? And then you give them the screwdriver and then they are motivated learning about this tool. And I'm not sure if I can remember that correctly, if it was Elon Musk or somebody else. However, even if it's a made-up story, I think the story really described in a very good way.
Yeah, I think it kind of reminds me of similar thing where you tell a kid, don't touch the fire, right? Don't touch, the hot thing over there. And they say, I want to touch it. Like the more you tell somebody don't do something, they want to do it, right? And then they touch it and, oh yeah, that's why he said that,
That literally happened to me when I was a child. My mother said, don't touch the iron. She was ironing and she put it off the plug. And then I made this logic, right, in my head that, well, she took it off the power. Why would it be still hot? And I put my fingers and sure enough.
It was hot.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like your way you approach it. And I can tell by the way you talk, you definitely talk to a lot of kids. You're very cheerful and very happy and let people kind of learn. But then if somebody has a question, you're willing to take the time to teach them. And that's not easy. I think that takes a lot of effort, right? Let's go back to your playing the piano. I think I need to spend lots of time playing that piano to become the same style as you. But I do appreciate your style to education. It's very interesting.
Thank you.
Now, I do have another question, right? Because I can imagine people like me and Zishan bringing our children to one of your courses, and I may shove my kid to the side and be playing myself, right? Do you ever have parents that kind of join in on this and they also want to do the dojo exercises with you?
Absolutely. We often have that. And well, because we focus on kids, talking about CoderDojo, not about Rust Linz or something like this, but at CoderDojo, we focus on kids. So when we have situations like that, where adults would like to take over, we particularly tell them to not do that. So it happened to me multiple times that I asked parents to move away from the keyboard and the mouse, even if it hurts them how long their child takes to find the correct keys on the keyboard. Sometimes it's really necessary to ask the adults to step away and to let the kids work in their particular speed. And if it takes forever to write the line, then they should have all the time that they need. And some adults get fascinated, or they are not passionate, are not patient enough. And then, well, we are a coding club for kids. We really ask the adults to move back. But it's different with Rust Linz, for instance, where we do a meetup for professionals, or with our global Azure event where we go for cloud computing, or with our event for teachers, where we have a teachers teach teachers event, where again, we deal with adults. But when it comes to children, we try to really give them the power over keyboard and mouse.
Sorry, my last one, then I'll give it over to you, Zishan. Sorry. My real question was, the parent will let their kid do whatever they want to do, but they want to join as a student. So their kid can do whatever, but they want to do it. Not they're pushing the kid to the side and they're doing it. Now, do you actually let the parents join in?
Yeah, we get a lot of questions in that regards. And sometimes it's really difficult to say no. There would be a huge demand for coding lessons, free coding lessons for adults. There is definitely a huge demand, but unfortunately, we only have so much time, so we have to say no to these questions. But if there is somebody out there who thinks that a coding club for adults is something that they could start, I think you would have a lot of people visiting your club.
Cool.
I just wanted to point out that the CoderDojo that Rainer is arranging, they're in German language. So,
yes, we are.
So viewers, audience know.
Yeah. We are in Germany.
Okay. Well, I thought the topic would be more about Rust Linz, but this is also super interesting. I mean, I think we spent a lot of time talking about the CoderDojo. Is there anything that you think we should know about it before we move back to Rust Linz? Rust Linz, sorry.
I think we pretty much covered it. You gave me the possibility to talk about something that I'm really passionate about. I love working with kids. I do that every single week. And I can somehow complete the story from the beginning, right? Yes, I am a teacher in my old school now. I have been doing that for, I think, 3 years. So yeah, I fulfilled my childhood dream. So now I can work with kids in CoderDojo, and I can work with young adults who learn coding inside of our coding school. So yeah.
The CoderDojo is a volunteer thing, right?
It's completely volunteer driven. Yes, it must be volunteer driven. You're not allowed to charge for it, and there are certain rules. CoderDojo is an international foundation, and they have certain rules. And if you want to name yourself a CoderDojo, you have to go along with these rules.
Cool.
Now let's get back to the adults. Tell us about the adult side of your education now.
About Rust Linz, for instance. Yeah. You see, I learned programming. My very first programming language was essentially Visual Basic. That was on the Commodore C64. And then I learned Pascal in school, and then I learned C. Then I learned C++, then I learned C#, and this was where I earned my first money with coding. So I started with a very, very, very early bits of C#. I know it from the very first technical previews. And I have been doing C# for many, many years. And then I had I had my problems with this platform when it was very closed source, just Microsoft, just Windows. I kind of started to dislike it. That was before everything was shifted towards open source. So I looked at other programming languages, and I discovered JavaScript and TypeScript and a little bit of Python and so on. And over the years, I gathered some programming languages which I was very passionate about. And personally, professionally, I use C#, TypeScript, JavaScript, and Go. And yeah, at one point, I got interested in Rust. I took a look at it, and it immediately brought me back to my early days. And this is why I tell the story of C programming. I remembered the times where how much fun it was doing this low-level stuff. And yeah, Rust fascinated me from the very beginning. And I found out that a friend of mine, Stefan Baumgartner, is also looking into Rust, and he's a real TypeScript hero. And we both found out that at the same time, I mean, we know each other for quite a long time. At the same time, we're dealing with the same, for both of us, new programming language called Rust. And so we decided, hey, we would like to talk about that. We would like to talk with like-minded people. And we originally thought we create a local meetup where Rust developers from in and around Linz meet, and I drink together and talk about our projects. And then Corona came, the whole COVID stuff. And it was immediately at that point when we thought, okay, it will not turn out like that. We will not be able to run Rust meetup here physically in Linz. So we didn't want to postpone it. So we decided, let's go virtual. Let's simply go virtual and do it virtually. And we will meet, hopefully, a bunch of people who are going to talk with us about Rust. And that is essentially the story of Rust Linz. We then decided to go virtual, to do virtual meetups. We asked some friends from the Rust community whom we know, and they pointed us to other people who they know. And with that, we simply started it. And so far, it's going pretty well. We have nearly every month Rust Linz meetup. We did 30 episodes so far. So we had approximately 60 visitors, and it was a lot of fun for us, a lot of fun and very inspiring to hear from great personalities about how they use Rust, what they do. And yeah, that's essentially the story behind it. And we plan to follow along. We plan to create many additional future episodes of Rust Linz, definitely.
Do you fear that at some point you will run out of people? Then you'll have to recycle?
That's definitely a challenge. And we are facing this challenge every single month. It's not easy to find people who are willing to simply talk about their projects and their experiences and so on. And yeah, we love that we have really, really shiny Rust personalities, people who are very well known in the Rust community. But on the other hand, if you have speakers from the meetup in your meetup history, then sometimes people who are just writing Rust every single day and have an interesting experience are kind of hesitating to share their experiences or findings because they think, well, I'm not a, I don't know, Rust compiler guru. I'm just everyday programmer who loves using Rust. And a big shout out to everybody. That's definitely not the case. It's so important to share your findings, your learnings, your experiences with like-minded coders. Don't hesitate. Meetups like Rust Linz, they are open to everybody. And we want to hear about why you have used Rust, or even we want to hear about your failures. What did you try? And what didn't work out? Because by sharing this knowledge, somebody else can learn something and maybe give something back. So I'm a strong believer in this meetup community where it's not just the professionals going on stage and showing world-class content. It's everyday programmers sharing their valuable experience with other everyday programmers. That's what meetups are all about. So yes, Sishan, we have this challenge of finding speakers. And I would like to make a big shout out here to everybody who thinks about, hey, I could share something, but I'm hesitate. Don't hesitate. Come to us, send us your proposal, and we are more than happy to have you on the show.
I think actually, in my opinion, those presentations done by people who are just starting or struggling, they're actually the most interesting ones, that at least to me, that's the case. Mm-hmm. And it's also like seeing other fail, you feel better about your failures, because we're all failing in some way or another, right? And the Rust compiler is not always kindest. So we know that it's treating us all the same way. It's not something very personal.
Yeah, you mean these error messages that span over more than one screen length with a lot of special characters in it? Yeah, I've been there. I've done that.
So, I mean, how far ahead do you actually plan for these Rust Linz meetups? I mean, are you planning the whole year, or do you plan, it just kind of depends on the speakers who've applied?
It really depends, and it mostly depends on the available amount of time we had of our time. We had months in the past where we had a nicely filled lineup for the upcoming 2 to 3 months, something like this. This is typically when Stefan and or I have a little bit of free time and we can actively reach out to people and plan everything in the future and so on. Currently, Stefan is very busy in his job. I am very busy in my job. So we are kind of struggling from month to month, to be very honest. That's how it is. So sometimes it's hard to really have a consistent flow of good speakers. And sometimes we have more time. It's really very much depending on how much time we can invest in these communities. For us, it's a side project. So we have to somehow find a compromise in spending time in our professional careers and in spending time into community work, for instance.
When's the next meetup, or do you guys have a cadence on like every third Saturday or something like that?
Yeah, we have a cadence that says in general every month. So we are currently in the planning phase for April. So mid to end of April, we have a good idea what we want to present there. But yeah, we try to make a Rust meetup every month. Sometimes, in rare cases, we don't manage to make a meetup every calendar month. But in general, in the last years that we have been doing that, we managed to make one meetup every month. There will be a special meetup, probably in May or June. We try to make at least one in-person meetup here in Linz just to see each other and to be very welcoming to the local community. This is also something that we are currently organizing. Yeah. The reason why we currently are a little bit struggling, it's also at the same time of the year. Every year, we have been organizing the worldwide Global Azure Austrian event. Global Azure is something that is vaguely connected to Microsoft's Azure platform. It's a cloud computing event, and we have been doing the Austrian edition of Global Azure for 8 years now. And of course, we are looking for Rust content there too. So this is a rather big event, at least for us. It's a virtual event, but with many hundreds of attendees. So it keeps us busy currently. So it's kind of juggling currently between different meetups and professional work. But yeah, we hope still to make one meetup in April.
So is there a call for speakers then at the moment?
Oh, absolutely. In Rust Linz, we have an ongoing call for speakers. Just go to rust-linz.at or just Google Rust Linz. You will find our website, and there you have a link to Sessionize. And if you are interested to speak at our Global Azure event, which will be on the 12th of May, virtual event, we will host the event in Gather Town. I'm not sure if you are familiar with that platform. I really like that platform. It's a lot of fun. And there is also a call for participation here open until the end of March. So there are still a few days where you can suggest talks for the Global Azure Austria event. So we have 2 open call for papers currently. Yeah.
Now, how do you judge if a candidate is good to present?
You mean for Rust Linz?
Yep.
We typically don't judge. So when somebody suggests something that is clearly connected to Rust and the community, then we try to find a spot for it. So there was never a need to judge between, 20 suggestions, and we can only choose 2. We never had that in the past. What we had in the past were companies who tried to use us for some marketing stuff. They want to sell a product and not really talk about Rust in the community and how they use it. What we had in the past were people who were looking for opportunities to talk about a certain topic, which is vaguely or not at all connected to Rust. We don't take those topics. So we say a polite but clear thank you, but no thank you to suggestions like that. But everything else, we never had a suggestion in the past where we had to say no. Maybe it takes a month or 2 until we have an open spot. But yeah, overall, everybody who wants to speak gets a possibility to speak.
What were some of the more interesting topics that have actually been presented from your point of view?
That is difficult. It's like if I asked you if you have multiple children, who is your favorite child? It's not possible.
Oh, I know my parents' favorite children. I'm my mom's favorite. That one I know for sure. She tells me that too.
Okay, I'm a single child, so I can tell you. I can't say that.
I don't know. I think every parent has favorites, or at least it's either they have a favorite or they have one that they maybe are not or the least favorite. Like just based on kind of looking and talking to friends and people around me.
I think Rainer is trying to save my feelings because I was one of the presenters. I'm pretty sure I'm not on the list.
Oh, is that what it is?
And of course, I very much enjoyed your talk. Absolutely. No, to be honest, for me, it's one of 2 things. Either it is a talk that is very relevant for what I do in my professional coding life. And I typically build distributed systems. So I have to deal a lot, data-driven distributed systems. So I deal a lot with databases, different kinds of databases, web APIs, different kinds of web APIs, architectures of distributed systems. This is primarily what I do in the context of cloud computing. So whenever it is about cloud computing and all this distributed system stuff, I get very passionate about it because this is what I do. This is how I earn my money. And the second thing, interestingly, for me personally, are those topics which are far, far, far away from that. So when it goes down to the metal, I mean, this is how I learned coding. I learned coding 35 years ago, something like this. And at that point in time, you had to learn things like how does a CPU work? What are registers? What is C? What is assembler? So if I think back to my youth, I sometimes love to go deep and learn about how things really work down to the metal. This is not what I do on a professional level. This is more my hobby. So kind of 2 different extremes, but I also enjoy these talks very, very much because they remind me of how I learned coding.
Rust as work, right?
I do Rust at work, but typically not on a very low level. So we use Rust in also building web APIs and more application programming in that area, especially in areas where it is really important to have a very high performance or to create very small applications which are super efficient in terms of cloud computing and things like that. Here we use Rust. But Rust is just one programming language in my company. I am an entrepreneur in my company. one out of four. So I would say we write most of the code that we do in C#, and we sprinkle in a little bit of Go and Rust every now and then. And of course, in the front end, it's web. It's all over the web. It's everything TypeScript and so on. But in the back end, it's mostly C# and a little bit of Go and Rust, where we have specific requirements or need to be very efficient or very performant.
That's very interesting, actually. Like, does that mean like you have a lot of experience with interoperating the languages, right? So do you have like some idea of like which languages is it easier to interface Go with Rust than it is to interface C# with Rust, or is it the same?
Mm-hmm. When we do distributed systems where different platforms need to talk to each other, we typically do that, at least until today, by using some kind of web API technology. So we either use, gRPC, web APIs, GraphQL, OData, and things like that. And then it really doesn't matter how you implemented the API. It just works. So that is what we currently do. But I am super, super interested in the whole WebAssembly technology. Maybe you have heard me speaking about WebAssembly on the server side, on the client side, because that is something where I think we are heading towards a beautiful future where it is no longer necessary to cross network boundaries, to talk from one platform to the other. I would really love to see a seamless interoperability story between Rust and Go and C# and JavaScript and so on. I mean, for some, it's already kind of working by using WebAssembly components and technologies like that. For me, WebAssembly is not so interesting from a client-side technology perspective, because if I need to program the browser, I simply use TypeScript and I love it. So why do I need WebAssembly for that? For me, WebAssembly is way more interesting for interoperability on the server side, to maybe mix different versions of one platform or language, or even more extreme, mix different platforms, languages, and frameworks without having to put them into separate containers or talk with gRPC or any other IPC technology between the components. So WebAssembly is a technology where I have high hopes about in the future.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are having a lot of hopes about WebAssembly and the future of that. There was a guest, I forgot their name. Alan had interviewed them about this Fermion, right?
Fermion. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I found it super fascinating, and I'm so looking forward to a future that they're enabling. It's going to enable so many things.
Oh, yes.
Interoperability is one of the many benefits. Just one of them.
Yeah, we had people from Fermion in Rust Linz too, and I follow their work closely, and it's amazing what they do. Platforms like Spin and so on are super exciting. And it's also a beautiful thing for Rust, because if you ask me, Go is kind of the language of containers, whereas Rust is kind of the language of WebAssembly. And it's funny because what brought me to Go, for instance, is not the fascinating language, because I don't think that Go is a fascinating language, but that's just me. But I saw that containers were written in Go, so I became curious and I took a look at Go. And it's kind of similar to WebAssembly. I'm very, very passionate about WebAssembly, so I tried to sharpen my Rust skills, because Rust is kind of the language of WebAssembly. So yeah, those things go kind of together for me.
Yeah. It's interesting to see that, that you chase the technology and then you chase the technology that's under the technology, right? And I don't think I hear that too much in the programming world. Usually they chase the language and then try to make the language fit to technology. So that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're approaching the end of our time, and it's been a pleasure to hear about the work you're doing in education for both the young and the not so young, right? Is there anything else that you're working on that you think we should know about or anything like that?
I think you already have been very patient with me, gave me the chance to talk about some of the projects that I do and I love to do. So thank you again for having me on the show. I would like to again invite everybody who is interested in taking a look at Rust Linz, maybe even take a heart and speak at Rust Linz. I again want to make a shout out to other events, especially the Global Azure event, where the call for paper is currently open. So just Google for Global Azure Austria and you will definitely find the website. And I think that's it, what I wanted to share with you. Thank you again, Alan and Sishan, very much for having me, for having this nice conversation. I very much enjoyed being your guest.
Thanks for being on. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for being on. I appreciate it. You've inspired me to change my mindset just a little bit. It's not easy to do. I'm kind of an old man where I don't like to change my mind so much.
I'd love to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, same here. I think I'll do better with my kid now. Rather not teach him anymore and get someone else.
So I think to sum it up is be a good parent and leave them alone. Let them make their own mistakes.
Yeah.
They'll find out later on why they should make classes.